What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Francis Ngannou responds to Jon Jones' comments. Francis Ngannou hasn't been a UFC fighter for a while now, and Dana White has repeatedly said he has no interest in working with the Predator again. But following Jon Jones' impressive win at UFC 309, Ngannou has resumed calling for a fight with Bones. For months prior to Ngannou's eventual UFC exit, the MMA world was buzzing big time on how a fight between him and Jones would play out. After all, both Ngannou and Jones had called for the all-star matchup, but ultimately negotiations failed to secure the fight. And before we continue, make sure to leave a like on the video to help support the channel. Well, fast forward to today, and it's not entirely clear what's next for Ngannou, especially now that he holds the PFL Super Fight Heavyweight title. The same can be said for Jon Jones, now that he's taken out Stipe Miocic. Gazillions of fans are hoping that Jones fights interim UFC champion Tom Aspinall. But since Bones has been non-committal about the scrap, claims that he's ducking the rising star continue. Well, speaking of ducking, recently Jones fired back at fans and pundits who have made that claim via social media. Crazy how being called a duck pays better than most of you internet tough guys will make in a lifetime. 2 fights in 4 years and still one of the biggest names in the sport? That's not ducking, that's winning. God's blessings hit different. Stay mad. Following Jones's post, Ngannou proceeded to raise eyebrows with this response. Blessings make haters uncomfortable, but they can't change it. There's only one fight, the right fight that will multiply your blessings. Hashtag Ngannou versus Jones. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if talk about Jones fighting Ngannou goes viral all over again. Recently, PFL CEO Peter Murray did his part in that respect. While speaking to TalkSport MMA at the PFL's event Friday in Saudi Arabia, Murray was asked about the possibility of Ngannou fighting either Jones or Aspinall. Murray claimed that the UFC is the only hurdle. We're supportive of it. The fighters want the fight, Jon Jones wants the fight, Francis wants the fight, we want the fight, our partners here in Saudi want the fight. It really comes down to, does the UFC want to step up to it or not, period. So as we've noted before on this channel, at the end of the day, the chances of Ngannou and Jones throwing hands seem slim to none, especially if Dana White continues to call the shots with the UFC, and there's been no indication that the outspoken CEO has any plans to retire. And as we've also argued, even if White did leave or squashed his beef with Ngannou, it seems unlikely that the UFC would want to give the PFL a big push by co-promoting with them. After all, there's no shortage of mainstream sports fans out there who believe that the UFC and MMA are interchangeable terms. Okay, now let's take a look at Umar Nurmagomedov reveals injury. For weeks, Umar Nurmagomedov repeatedly insisted that he should be the man who fights new bantamweight champion Merab Dvalishvili in his first title defense. Not only that, the undefeated fighter said that he's been told he would fight for the belt next. Given that Nurmagomedov has gone 6-0 in the UFC to date and that he's 18-0 overall, lots of fans and pundits nodded with approval when he reported that. But with the end of 2024 fast approaching, it's starting to look like perhaps Nurmagomedov is starting to think that he may not get that fight. How so? Well, as you likely recall, Merab has repeatedly shot down the idea that Umar deserves a title shot. Then there's been the issue of when the bout would happen. Nurmagomedov has said that he will not fight during Ramadan, which begins in February and extends throughout much of March. Not too long ago, there were even reports that Nurmagomedov had agreed to fight Song Yadong in December, before it was revealed that the fight was not happening. Well, fast forward to today, and Nurmagomedov has shed some light on the timing of his next fight, and why nothing has been booked. Via social media, the Dagestani star said this: "I had a small arm fracture and couldn't perform in January. My arm is fine now, and I'm open to any offers. Anyone, anywhere." So there's a couple of things to look at here. One, now it makes sense why Nurmagomedov was not booked to fight before the year was up, or first thing in 2025. But what's also interesting here is the absence of Nurmagomedov explicitly calling out Merab. Of course, none of this means for certain that Umar's camp has been told by the UFC that he's not fighting for the belt next, but his call to fight anyone is quite the pivot, yeah? What do you think? Could this mean that maybe the UFC has told Umar they've proceeded with, say, Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan? Or that maybe the promotion wants to keep Merab on the sidelines until Sean O'Malley is ready to return? Or do you still expect to see the new Georgian champion fight Nurmagomedov next? Alex Pereira was filmed arm wrestling a bodybuilder and Alex made him quit. Check this out.
Let's go.
마지막으로
Up next, Jamahal Hill and Michael Bisping go back and forth. Jamahal Hill won't actually throw hands until UFC 311, but the former light heavyweight champion continues to spar online with the likes of Yuri Prochazka, Magomed Ankalaev, and now Michael Bisping. Hill has never been shy about sharing his opinion or firing back at his detractors. Most recently, he's been trading verbal jabs with the aforementioned Ankalaev and Prochazka, and in the case of the latter, he will fight his fellow former champion on January 18th. But ever since Hill's now well-documented yawn at UFC 307, which he did in reaction to Pereira's finish of Khalil Rountree Jr., the former champion has been taking some heat. A key reason that generated some backfire was because Hill was brutally put away by Poatan this past April. Following that loss, Hill had argued that referee Herb Dean had not done a good job of properly separating him from Pereira after the champion waved off a low blow. What's that got to do with Bisping? Well, during a recent episode of the former Middleweight Champions podcast, Bisping used the term sore loser while discussing Hill's reaction to that loss. That prompted Hill to post this via social media. Bisping calling me a sore loser and talking about as men on losing is the craziest to me ever. Bro, you've been crying and salty about Dan Henderson for 20 years and Vitor Belfort for 15 years. You would think spending half your career losing, you would know how to. That prompted the Count to respond with this. Did you watch what I said, or did you read some headline? If it's a headline, I'll accept your apology. I said you were a bit of a sore loser because you're a true competitor, and then went on to explain how if that energy is channeled correctly, it can be truly beneficial to a fighter's mindset. I was being nice, not talking. Didn't have you down as the easily offended type. All the best with your camp. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes from here, if anywhere. But what's your take on this? Does Hill have a point by bringing up Bisping's long-held issues with his vicious KO loss to Dan Henderson and his stoppage loss to Vitor Belfort during the latter's well-documented TRT era? Or is Bisping right in labeling Hill as a bit of a sore loser in terms of how he handled his loss to Poatan? Up next, Chael Sonnen sends a message to Jon Jones. As we discussed earlier, talk about Jon Jones fighting Tom Aspinall continues to make the rounds. In fact, hype for the fight has only ramped up since Bones took out Stipe Miocic at UFC 309. While Jones continues to scoff at the idea that he needs to fight Aspinall, he's also said that he's gonna fight again. Further, Jones left the door open to a bout with the interim heavyweight champion, provided that the UFC provides few money. But since Jones has not called out Aspinall, and because he said he's interested in fighting Alex Pereira, some have wondered if Bones versus Poatan could happen, especially since Jones has even said he'd be willing to vacate the heavyweight title to pursue super fights. Well, Chael Sonnen believes if Jones is holding out for the Pereira fight, or any other one besides one with Aspinall, he's gonna wait a long time. I'll let you know what UFC stands. John has two choices. You fight Tom or you don't fight. There's nobody else going to be offered. In fact, we've got a name that came off the board of possibilities in terms of Alex Pereira. Dana put that to absolute rest, and when the odds makers put it as a 6-1 spread favoring Jones, that fight is gone. So John can sit out and not fight. That's true, but he's not going to be in a spot where he could fight someone else. It's basically retire or it's fight Tom Aspinall. Is Sonnen onto something here? He could be. Following UFC 309, White did say he had no doubt now that Jones is too big and too well-rounded for Pereira. Further, the UFC bossman has repeatedly said that Jones should fight Aspinall next. Now, if talks for Jones-Aspinall don't go well, because Bones is asking for way too much money, would he really accept a significantly lower sum to fight Poatan? Given his camp would likely argue that fight will also generate truckloads of cash. Probably not, right? Furthermore, Pereira is one of the biggest names right now in the UFC, so does the promotion want to see Poatan's stock take a big hit by a potentially decisive loss to Jones? What do you think? Will the UFC pursue any other fights with Jones if he negotiates himself out of a showdown with Tom Aspinall? Now, let's take a look at Michael Bisping sends a warning to Ian Garry for UFC 310. Ian Machado Garry has done nothing but win since he embarked on his pro MMA career back in 2019. But based on recent comments Michael Bisping made about Garry's upcoming fight with Shavkat Rakhmonov, one could infer that he won't be surprised if Garry's undefeated run comes to an end. Garry's agreed to fight his fellow undefeated welterweight and rising star at the December 7th event, after champion Belal Muhammad was sidelined with a bone infection. For months, Garry's acknowledged how complete and dangerous of a fighter Rakhmonov actually is, and the Irish fighters also said that's why he wants to face him. Well, during a recent video that went up on Bisping's YouTube channel, he weighed in on the highly anticipated fight between Garry and Rakhmonov, and while doing so, Bisping reported the following. Ian Garry is probably going to dance around the octagon and use the exact same game plan what he did against Jeff Neal. He's got to keep Shavkat Rakhmonov off him. If he cannot stop the takedown, he will get finished, and that is no disrespect to Ian Garry. Bisping also added this. Can Ian Garry stop the takedown? Because if he can't, someone's zero has got to go, and that's probably going to be Ian Garry's. but he does have a path to victory of using the range, sticking and moving. The crowd will boo, but who cares about the crowd? Winning is all that matters. To date, it's not like Rakhmonov has been a takedown machine in the octagon. According to UFC stats, he's averaging 1.49 takedowns per fight. His takedown accuracy is 29%. But it's safe to say that Garry has not faced anyone like Rakhmonov to date, who is a finishing machine with both strikes and chokes. Further, we haven't really seen Garry's wrestling or clinch game consistently tested. As Bisping alluded to, Garry's also a tough puzzle to solve for his opposition, thanks to his range, reach, and nasty jab. What's your take? Will Rakhmonov take Garry down and take his O? Khamzat Chimaev deserves title shot next? Sean Strickland has repeatedly, and in some cases, ferociously claimed that he should be next for the middleweight champ, Dricus du Plessis. But the man who held that belt for some time, Robert Whittaker, disagrees. Ever since Strickland dropped the 185 title to du Plessis by a split decision this past January, he's argued that he should get a rematch. Ultimately, however, the UFC booked Strickland to fight Paulo Costa this past summer, and following the controversial fighter's win, he repeated his title shot call-out. Not only that, after Whittaker was quickly subbed by Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 308 in October, Strickland insisted he's next for DDP. Strickland has also said that the UFC's told him as much. But via his YouTube channel, Whittaker recently outlined why he believes Chimaev and not Strickland should be tapped for a title shot. I'm interested to see what he does next. I think he's going to be a nightmare for a lot of the dudes in the top 5 because I don't know how you stop that takedown. I think he should go straight to Dricus. I don't think sitting out should be rewarded, ever, but it's not my call, not my decision. Whittaker is not the only one who feels this way. It's true that Strickland did narrowly lose to DDP, he also did lose the belt in his first title defense, and Costa has not been viewed as a title shot contender in several years. Chimaev has only fought one time in 2024 and once in 2023, so it's not like he's been really that active either. But at the end of the day, recency bias is a huge thing in MMA, and Chimaev just smashed through Whittaker. Strickland, meanwhile, has recorded just one stoppage since 2020. But what do you think? Do you want DDP to fight Chimaev or Strickland next? Conor McGregor under investigation again in court after his recent comments online. According to the Irish Independent, the High Court is reportedly investigating Conor for his online attacks to Nikita Hand after he was found guilty and ordered to pay over $250,000 in fees to Nikita. As we've been reporting all week, Conor McGregor believes he's innocent and has fired many shots at Nikita Hand on social media. The High Court can rule more damages to Nikita Hand for the comments that were being made. And from everything Conor has posted online, it's not a good look for him. Adding to his financial problems in the last couple of weeks, it appears that Conor will also be responsible for covering Nikita Hand's legal expenses. In many legal disputes, the losing party is required to pay the legal costs incurred by the winning side. In this case, McGregor is reportedly being ordered to pay over $1 million in legal fees for Nikita.